Hello and welcome to TransForm Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software. And today we're going to be going over basically a review of Alpha TransForm. So for some of you, this is going to be maybe even a boring session. Sorry to be frank about that. But we have a group of brand new people who are coming on board with TransForm, and we kind of want to just give them the lay of the land. So this is the first TransForm Tuesday of the month, so we're going to go back to basics today. So hang on a second, I've got a brand new recording set up here in the studio. I'm going to go ahead and switch webcams. Follow me to camera 2. Here we go, camera number 2. See if I can figure out how to work this. All right, here we go, great. So hello and welcome. Also, I'd like to point out that beyond TransForm Tuesday just being a presentation, we are also a Q&A session. So by all means, go ahead and type those questions into the questions window of the GoToWebinar control panel. And not joining us yet, but I think pretty soon will be Sarah Mitchell, in charge of our documentation department. She'll also be here to answer your questions as well. So let's get started, shall we? Okay, so let's begin with talking about what Alpha TransForm is. Before I go any further, can someone let me know, because I don't have anyone else here, whether or not you're hearing me, whether or not you could see my screen. You should see something which says Alpha TransForm Custom Mobile App Solutions Platform here on the screen. If you can see that, can you go ahead and type I can see it or something like that into the questions window, into the questions box or the comments section, either way. I'm not sure if anyone's hearing me. All right, again, if anyone hears me, just go ahead and, there we go, wonderful. Oh, there are a lot of people on today. All right, excellent, thanks very much. All right, perfect. All right, so let's get started. So I'll move this out of the way. I'm gonna start talking on basics about what is Alpha TransForm. So let me just move on to the next thing. So let's talk at the very beginning, and let's not talk so much about technology, but let's talk about needs of businesses and why you would use something like TransForm to begin with. If you're interested in building a business application, especially one for doing data collection out in the field, but really any kind of business application, and you need it to run on a mobile phone, there are a couple of different options that you can go with. And we have these arranged here from left to right, but I'm actually going to address them from right to left. So there's the commercial off-the-shelf, COTS applications. If you have a business need that requires that a COTS or custom off-the-shelf, a commercial off-the-shelf package will work for you, that's often a really good starting point. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses are quite unique, and what works for one business isn't quite going to work for another one. So in many cases, people find that that's not quite a solution for them. The same is the case for a SaaS platform. In many cases, you'll find, or maybe won't find, that you'll find a software as a solutions package working for you. Let me give you an example. Most people have very similar requirements when it comes to accounting, for example. So owning QuickBooks on your computer or getting QuickBooks online might be a great solution for you, and that might take care of it. There's no need to build custom solutions for those types of packages. However, for many situations, you're going to find that off-the-shelf or SaaS is not going to do the job. So as a result, you'll need to rely on actually building out code yourself. Now, the traditional way of coding things, especially if we're talking about for mobile devices here, is to do native development. So we're talking basically iOS and Android. At this point, Windows Phone is really not so much of a factor anymore. Now, those are written in two different types of development languages. And even if you're not doing it for mobile, even if you're doing it for web, in all cases, you're probably going to be using some kind of framework. In other words, some pre-built sets of code that you're going to be bringing into your project and then making adjustments bit by bit. The next step up the line is what we call low-code development, and this is similar to our product called Alpha Anywhere, but there are other ones as well, such as OutSystems, Mendex, and there are a few others. And with a low-code development platform, instead of bringing in these chunks of code and editing them yourself, you're using these builders. So think of wizards, what we call genies in Alpha Anywhere. So you're basically following through a list of dialog box steps in order to create the code. That is most of the code. However, some of the code, you're still going to end up handwriting yourself. In The case of Alpha Anywhere, we write that in XBasic, but you can also do it in any .NET supported language, as well as Node.js for doing server-side types of coding. And then another option beyond low code then is the no code building solution. And a no code building solution is adaptable, more adaptable than a SaaS platform or a off-the-shelf solution, but it's still, so it doesn't require code, but it is sometimes a bit limited in terms of what you can do. If it has all the features that you need, or you find you can build out what you want in it, these are really terrific. And so up until recently, Alpha Software has sort of been playing in this space, in this low-code development space and native development space to a degree. And then along came Alpha TransForm, and we figured that we could actually, so that's sort of Alpha Anywhere here in this, in this low-code development area, with the ability to bring in native chunks of code. When it came to Alpha TransForm, we started to work here more in this no-code build area. So the plan is that you don't actually have to write anything, any type of coding, even though there is a coding language available, to get most things done. So if you're building a data collection application, you want to get it on a phone, you take pictures of things, you're doing inspection, and look at that data in a back-end database, there's no reason to do any type of coding there. So as I said, Alpha Anywhere does kind of expand into that realm, and Alpha TransForm also expands into that realm, all the way up through being a SaaS platform. In most cases, your Alpha Anywhere or Alpha TransForm applications are actually probably going to be hosted by Alpha Software on our server, and you'll just simply get it as a SaaS platform. In some cases where you're doing high volumes, you have special needs, you're not in an area where our servers are close to you. Right now we have servers in the UK and in the United States, and I believe we've just opened one recently in Australia. I know we have for cloud, but I think for TransForm as well. Or if it hasn't, will be coming shortly. That's fine. But if you're in some other places, Asia and so on, where the physical proximity of the server is an issue, you may want to think about doing an on-site deployment. All right, so this slide, let's go over this one real quick. I know there's a lot going on with this slide, but if we think about what standard mobile development is, it starts out with the idea of, okay, we need to accomplish we've got some sort of problem or something that we need to address. Or, for example, we are using a lot of paper forms, and we would like to instead collect data on a cellular device or on a mobile device because we can get the information faster. We don't require people to drive into a main office and drop off the paperwork. There's actually a million ideas, a million reasons why you might want to digitize, and I won't even get into those at the moment. From there, once you have the idea, you come up with some sort of design. How do I want the application to work? What are the requirements? What are the end users and stuff? And then you hire or you have your own expert development team that goes through and builds the user interface and puts in the business logic. If you need the application to be offline, that can add a significant amount of time to that effort if you're coding this yourself from scratch. You may decide that you need to do local storage. In other words, you might want to be able to keep documents, databases, and other things on the device. You're definitely going to want some sort of authentication. You're going to want usernames and passwords and permissions and things like that. And then you may also need to connect it to some sort of back-end system that you're already using. Maybe you don't, maybe this will be a standalone system. And then you build it, you test it, you publish it, you debug it. And this typically, the time frame for this is usually weeks to months when you're doing sort of standard mobile development. And if you do need to make updates, and software frequently needs to be updated because business requirements may change, but also simply because you'll find that the devices that they're running on change as well, and requirements change, something that we need to keep up with quite a bit here. If you do that, you'll find it could take hours to days to basically to update some of these applications depending on what the change is happening underneath. And because of that, there's a big risk of failure. In fact, quite a few mobile development projects that start out as great ideas with good designs and even have a good team behind them just run into a whole bunch of unknowns that push the budget and the time frame out to the point where it's no longer realistic to work on the project anymore. So this is why low code and no code handles some of these issues and might be a preferential way to go. Oh, also one more important thing I'd like to point out, and that is that if you're developing for 3 different apps, then that's 3 times the amount of work. If you're developing for 2 different platforms, that's twice as much work. So that could be 6 times as much work as well. When you're using a low-code or mobile development platform, especially with Alpha TransForm, you'll find that you only have to do the designing and the building really once for each app. You don't have to worry about the fact that it's running on Android or iOS. And you don't even really build the app at all. And this is an important part. With Alpha TransForm, the mobile applications are already there in the Apple iOS store and in the Android store. So we've given this presentation a bunch of times, and this seems to be a point that people don't always get. They say, well, how do I get my project up into the Apple store or into iOS, Google Play Store? And the answer is, well, it's already there. You can download it. All you're going to be doing is taking that application from the store, the TransForm application, and you're going to be transforming it into the application that you need. So to do that, you're similar to the other steps. You're going to be designing the form and adding some business logic and maybe configuring where the outbound data should go. Maybe you want to push it into a database that you already have set up, or maybe it's that. So that can all be done using TransForm, and that can be done using, in most cases, absolutely no code at all. Although TransForm does have the ability to do some coding. There is a scripting language behind it, should you need to use it, and we'll get into that in a minute. Speaking of minutes, you can build an application in minutes. I'd say half the people here, just looking at the list here, half the people here are Alpha Anywhere or Alpha TransForm experts, or at least power users, I'll say at this point. And you'll know that if I said, could you put together a form for collecting maybe name and address and a few other data fields, and maybe take a picture and save that as an application, how long would it take to build an application like that, so that I could just simply, pick up my mobile phone and start entering data and having it go into a database? For most of you, you could have something like that up and running in about 5 to 10 minutes. For those of you who are brand new, you'd probably go through our 45-minute tutorial, and then you'd be able to do it in 5 to 10 minutes. So you'll end up with something that's really very, very little risk. Usually just takes hours to build. I say usually, sometimes there are some custom requirements that are a little tricky, that might need to integrate with some sort of back-end data source that you need to find specs behind. That's a possibility. But generally, it's a fairly low-risk assessment. And you'll end up with, again, this is all in the same app. So when you open up the TransForm app, even though you might have four what you consider to be business apps, we call those forms, even though they're really kind of apps, all built into that one TransForm application. Okay, I think I've gone through that slide enough. Let's move on. So the question is, can a pre-built app be powerful and flexible enough? You may have heard me mention back in the no-code section that no-code is fine, but it is limited. So if a no-code solution doesn't have all of the features built into it that you need, you're not going to get those features. So if you have any features that you absolutely require and you find not built into a no-code solution, you shouldn't go with a no-code solution. So the no-code solutions, I'm not gonna mention them by name, but there are a bunch of them. We refer to them sort of as forms products. And they typically all have these same sorts of things. They allow you to collect various types of information: text, date, signatures, numbers, currencies, phone numbers, photos. Some of them are smart enough to allow you to annotate the photos, some are not. That's a feature that's built into TransForm, but not built into everything. A lot of them do allow for a connection to a database. Many of them have got an user interface with at least some sort of responsive design, meaning that it's going to look good both on a phone and on a tablet device. So it'll be readable on a phone, but on a tablet, it will take advantage of the extra real estate. All of them allow at least some rudimentary ability to, at least on the phone, search and sort and filter the forms. They'll also be available for Android and iOS. And the authentication, just think usernames and passwords and what you're allowed to do, is also built into most of these standard data capture types of form product applications. Now, you may have some more sophisticated requirements, and this is where you could take advantage of some of the things that are built into TransForm. For example, we have the ability to do user permissions. And so that allows you to indicate what each member of your group is allowed to do. Maybe some are allowed to build forms. Maybe some are allowed to fill out those forms, or they're only allowed to fill out some of the forms. Or they can view data, or maybe they can view data for just some of the forms or some of the applications that you have built in TransForm. And you can have people who serve as administrators. You can have people, who are allowed to make changes to permissions and other things like that. So we have a very, very granular system that can get right down to the form level if necessary, in which you can either allow or deny people to do certain things. We also have a pretty good system for building in webhooks, APIs, and triggers. In other words, we can make Alpha TransForm work with systems that you already have, just using functions that are already built into TransForm. We're going to go into a little bit more of that in just a moment. Also, it has both online and offline support. This is not a given in every single data capture application. Some data capture applications have no offline capabilities whatsoever. They're basically just wrappers for some fancy web apps that need to go against a backend system that needs to be connected at the time that you're collecting data. Now, this is no good if you've got field service workers out in the field who do not have a reliable internet connection or Wi-Fi connection. And basically those apps don't work. And it's a surprising number of even commercial applications that have that sort of limitation used by big companies. Some of them do work, but they only work in sort of limited ways. Like you can collect some of the data, but for example, if you were doing a barcode scan or something like that, it wouldn't be able to look up in a database and figure out what the product was that scanned it. It would have to wait until later when you got a cell phone signal. This might be fine, by the way, but it can be a limitation. It's one you should know about. In-app calculations and validations. Well, most systems do have some form of validation where they, make sure that a field that's required is filled in. But we could do some very sophisticated calculations validations just by doing just a little bit of scripting. So things like averages and even mathematical things, sines and cosines, calculating areas and voltages and resistances and all kinds of things have been done by by customers of ours out in the field or partners of ours out in the field who need to do calculations to make sure perhaps things are within spec tolerance. We also have the ability to look up from local and remote databases. This goes back to the barcode example that I had just given you a moment ago. And we allow you to do, so and that involves having on-device data. That could be databases, but it could also be training videos. It could be PDF manuals. It could be a whole bunch of other things that you can include in your application for offline use. All right, so you can use TransForm as its own standalone system. So in other words, you can do data collection and display on your Android and on your iOS device, and then you can go to the TransForm web portal in the back end that we call TransForm Central and take a look at the information that's been submitted. You can also send forms back out to people in the field. We'll get into that in a minute. And that could be the whole thing. That could be the entire solution. But in many cases, you're going to want to have some sort of system of record that you already have in place. Talk to TransForm so it becomes all one system that's been glued together nicely. And let's go into a little bit about that. But first, let's go over some examples. Up until now, we've been talking theoretically about the different things are, but here are 3 examples, and I've got a few more to show you in a minute. So this first one is a site visit, and it's actually one of the first applications that we ever built in TransForm, or at least this type of application. These are great for doing safety inspections or for checking out a job site to make sure that it's complete, although we have another one for that as well. And you can do all kinds of cool things. Here we've got different types of buttons. Here we've organized our fields into different pages. You can complete a visit, in other words, change the status of a form. That you can calculate how long you can see when someone, for example, arrived and started filling out a form, when they departed, and how long they were there, using calculations and things like that. And we can do lookups as well. This is also another popular one. This is an equipment inspection application. Not a lot to say about it. Depends on, you can look up a particular piece of equipment and based on the equipment that you've looked up, it'll ask you different questions. The next one is a 5S audit, which is typically used in the manufacturing and services businesses. We've got that as a built-in application. Move on to the next slide. Safety is also a big one here. I like this slide because we have things moving around here. And we also do things for medical and the life sciences. We've also done things for drug trials as well. There's really no limit to the type of data that can be collected in TransForm and can be done all without any coding. I know we were talking about coding a moment ago, but the ones that we're showing here with very few exceptions, maybe the one where we calculated the time spent that required one line of code, but most of this stuff can be done without any code whatsoever. Here you're taking a look at forms that have been placed onto a tablet type device. Phones are probably the most popular way right now for people to collect data, but tablets have got their place. They've got bigger screen real estate, and they're very lightweight, very inexpensive. So if you're not doing bring your own device, you can assign these tablets to workers. We have one for rail yard inspections, OSHA checklist, job safety analysis. These are all examples that have actually been used out in the field, and they can all be built without writing any code. Another thing, this example here is just to show you that we can take advantage of screen real estate. In other words, we can do responsive types of designs. So when you turn the tablet sideways, for example, you can fit more fields this way than you could when you had it in the portrait mode. And we can make those adaptations automatically in the software, again, without doing any coding, which is smart about that. Building it is, again, I know half of the folks up here say, I've seen all of this before, but building it is actually really quite a treat the first time you do it, because it's really just a matter of typing in or choosing different types of fields, and it puts it together here for you on the right in this little preview section. Here we're building just a simple site inspection application. And I'll go through this. This is a pre-recorded video. I'm going to skip through this here so you don't have to watch all of it. But basically it involves picking out fields from a field list. I'll show you all the different kinds of fields in a minute, and putting them together here. And then we have this other method, this quick reference method, where what you do, hit the play button on this one, is you can actually just type in or paste in your questions. Ooh, that was a little quick. Hang on, I'm going to pause that. So you can paste in all of your questions and have it build the field for you automatically. It's just basically like a word processor type of interface. Let's move on here. So this is you do in fact see, we call it WYSIWYG. It isn't exactly what you get, but you do get to see as you're building it what it's going to look like here in this preview window. And we have a whole bunch of different types of form types, but we also have other ways of laying out your form into different areas. So for field types, we have obvious things: phone numbers, currencies, date, time. We have the ability to do a stopwatch, which is a cool feature. We have photo, we have audio, we have signature, we have barcode scanning. We'll go into that in a little bit. But we can also divide things up into sections and into pages, so that if you have a lot of fields, you can organize the pages and not make the user scroll forever and ever and ever. There's also a feature which you don't see, but if you were using it on a phone, a table of contents feature, which allows you to skip right ahead to a particular field. Now we have put together forms that have literally had, I'm not going to say 1,000, but they've had many hundreds of fields, and they've been very easy to work with because we can break them down into sections like this. Among the other features that we have are the ability to do if then else. So in other words, if a certain condition is true, perhaps you're going to answer some follow-on questions that'll go along with that. We have the ability to put in HTML. We can add action buttons, which are used for coding, which I'll show you a little bit later. Some things you can do with action buttons that are cool is you can look up driving directions to a particular address, which is one cool thing to do. Or you could do a lookup against an online database to get some information back that you might need. All right, let's move on. So that's, I've talked a little bit about dividing things up into sections and the fact that we can operate in landscape and portrait mode, and we fit on small devices. Gone through all of that. And the preview section, I told you about that. Let's skip over. There's a certain amount of customization that you can do in TransForm. So you can add things like icons and colors and a few other things. And this is actually one iteration back, so it's changed a little bit, but we still let you do lots of things when it comes to making it yours in terms of making things look right for you on the screen. However, we'll be frank with you, this is a pre-packaged application, so there is a limit to what you can do. If you are looking for building the next Candy Crush, we're really not in the games business. If you're looking for building the next whatever, and it has to be pixel perfect, and TransForm isn't quite cutting it, you probably want to take a look at our other product, Alpha Anywhere, which absolutely can build out those types of interfaces. So we try to come up with an interface that looks really nice, somewhat generic, and is somewhat customizable, but it's never going to be exactly, you can't make it exactly 100% to your exact look or whatever. I mean, if it looks good enough for you, go with TransForm. If not, take a look at some other solution. I hate to scare you away from TransForm, but it's just a question that's asked a fair amount. So let's take a look at one of the other really cool features of Alpha TransForm, and that's the ability to do what we call embedded business logic. So embedded business logic can be anything from calculations, for example, calculating some things. So if you're building an invoice, for example, it's an example we showed, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago. It can show you the totals of what all the products add up to. It can calculate tax. It can multiply quantity times price to come up with the extension values and so on. You can do data arithmetic. You can figure out how many days have passed or how many hours have passed. You can multiply that by something to figure out how much money is involved, for example. We also have data input validation, so making sure that something is within range. If you're taking a look at a car battery, for example, which should be somewhere between 0 and 12, 0 if it's dead, that's bad, and you come back with a range of 18 or 24, you could say, look, this is a ridiculous value. Please check to make sure you meant to enter that. So we can check for limits. We can compare it against other values. Maybe value A always has to be higher than value B for a particular application. We can do that type of input validation as well. And that's also using the TransForm programming language. In most cases, this is 1 line or maybe 2 lines of code to do these sorts of things. And it's not terribly difficult to manage, but it is a little bit of coding. So we need to be straight with you about that. One of the other things we also handle, and I haven't really talked about it much, but we will get into it, is workflow. So with workflow, the question is, what happens after I finish filling out a form? Maybe, for example, if I filled out a form and there was something wrong, like let's say I found a really important safety hazard on a job site, right? Instead of just simply submitting that into a database, I might want to have a copy of that record automatically sent to our on-site safety inspector or a manager or a boss or something based simply on the values of the fields. Sometimes that's not worth triggering it, and it should just go directly into a database. And we can do that type of workflow and some other types of workflows as well. Moving along, let me give you some examples of the stuff that I've been just talking about hypothetically. Here's one which is checking a minimum and maximum limit right here. And here it can automatically tell you, for example, whether or not it's a pass or fail. So for example, if we knew that the number on the left had to be smaller than the number on the right, maybe it succeeded, or maybe it's vice versa, so it failed. But you can automatically calculate whether or not something is working or not working based on what you've entered in. And it doesn't just have to be 1 or 2 fields. You can use lots and lots of different fields to put it together. Move on to another one. We already talked about multiplying quantity times price. And in fact, we have another TransForm Tuesday, which was dedicated to building invoices. I'm going to move along. We have the ability to fill in fields automatically. This one is very cool. So let's say you're looking through you happen to know the site code for a building that you're at is BOS 001. It could automatically look into a database and fill in all of the rest of the information that would be required on that form, such as the name of the site and its address and its latitude, longitude, and maybe even site notes that were recorded from the last time a form was filled out in that particular location. So instead of requiring the person in the field to go manually re-enter all these things like you'd have to do on a paper form, these sorts of things can be filled in automatically. And in this particular example, and ones we've done before, you can do it against backend APIs. So maybe you have a Google Sheet, a document, a spreadsheet in Google Docs that has all of this site information in it, which means that you could update that in Google Sheets, or an administrator who's familiar with Google Sheets could do that. And that can actually be used live with your application. Now, of course, to connect to Google Sheets API, you do need to be online. So that wouldn't work in an offline scenario, but we do allow you to look at a built-in on-device database, which would work in an offline scenario. So for example, here we're looking up a barcode. The barcode gives us the model number, the manufacturer, a description, and maybe even a file, a PDF file showing you how to inspect that equipment, or maybe it's the user's guide for that equipment, or a training guide or something like that. All of that can be stored directly on the device, so that if you do not have a cell connection or a Wi-Fi connection, you can go ahead and use that anyway. So, all right, for those of you who are not into coding, look away because this might look scary. But for those of you who are not afraid of a little bit of coding behind the scenes, I just want to show you a little bit of how that works. And our coding language is called TPL, the TransForm. And basically it works by, whoops, all right, move up a page. It works on an event basis. So when you change a field, or you open up the editor for a particular field, or you first load a field, or you submit a field, or you press a button, you can get it to run a piece of code. We also allow you to build, we have a lot of built-in functions. Some of the functions are, really good high-level things, such as Ajax Get, which can go and pull data down from a data source. We have, and then various ones like, I'm showing you just the A's, B's, and C's here, but we have mathematical functions, we have array functions, we have JSON functions, we have pretty much anything you could imagine that you would need in a programming language you're going to find in TPL. Not only that, but it's got a debugger that works not just where you're writing it. You write the TPL code using in TransForm Central. That's the web portal. But you can also debug it not only there, but you could debug it right on the mobile device itself without even having to tether it in or plug in a cable or anything like that. That is a feature that is built right into TransForm, so which is terrific. When you find something, when you first code something for the first time, often you'll make an error. Maybe it's a syntax error, maybe it's a conceptual error. You want to figure out what it is. This can tell you what it is in a hurry. And again, we're not talking about writing large chunks of code. Often we're talking a line or two, 3, 10 if it's extremely complicated and it's getting something back from a database, but not a ton of code beyond that. All right, so that's it. And again, we want to reiterate this point. This is not, don't think of it as a barrier. Don't think of TPL as some scary thing. You do not need to use TPL for most things. There may be some edge case things where it's absolutely critical for you to use it, and it's there when you need it. That's all it is. It's there. So if you think about it like with Excel, that's sort of the example we've given here on the slide. In Excel, there's a programming language behind Excel. You might be familiar with it. It's the Visual Basic or VBA code. And so that lets you do all kinds of cool things in Excel. Like if you entered something into a particular field, it could go ahead and do not just calculations against other things, but it could have a dialog box pop up. It could ask the user a certain question. It could do some sort of validation or something like that. But only a small percentage of people in Excel actually write VBA code. Or if they do write VBA code, they're actually just using just a little teeny tiny snippet of what they need to get the job done. And that's exactly the thinking that we have behind TransForm. So TransForm is really meant to be coding optional, but we do have the ability to do coding should you need it. Now, I mentioned earlier that I was going to get into workflows, so let's get into that right now. So typically, let's say the most easiest scenario is you have a worker out in the field who's got TransForm on their phone, and they've got a form that's been, or an application, and they perform some data. They perform some data collection, I should say, and they submit that data. And so what happens to the data? Well, one thing that can happen to the data is it can be sent to a different user. It could be routed or sent or passed along to a different user for approval or completion. Maybe you are sending it from the person who performs the work to the person who inspects the work. So the person now knows, aha, I've got something to inspect. This worker sent it to me. It's already pre-filled out most of the form, and it's simply up to them to go and check on it. Another thing that you can do is you can actually create and assign new forms based on the fact that this brand new TransForm form has been entered. And you could do some things that you would expect that you could do. For example, you could email customer reports of the data. You could trigger an API call to an external system. Let's go into that in a second. And you can store data in an external database, such as a SQL Server database or even a NoSQL database. So let's take a look here at some of the things that you can do. So built into TransForm, when you submit data, there are these things called on-submit events. One of the on-submit events lets you email data. There's another one which allows you to send data to SQL databases, and there's a third one which allows you to make REST API calls. I believe there's one or two others, but they're escaping me at the moment. So these basically can put data or email data into the format that you want or need, the format that you already have. Now there's another option called Zapier. Zapier is a third-party service where it can trigger actions. It says in hundreds of external applications and platforms. That's actually not correct. It's really thousands of applications and platforms. So some of them might involve Google Sheets, for example, or QuickBooks, or a lot of other things. So Zapier is really kind of cool. It does cost a little bit of money to set things up, but it is an extremely simple tool to use. And I've done, I think, quite a few TransForm Tuesdays on them. The last one I did was sort of a fun example in which we had lights as if they were on a factory floor going on or off depending on an error condition. But there's really just, the sky's the limit with Zapier in terms of building out things quickly. And of course, we support regular REST APIs. So these are things that almost every system now has the ability to, or most systems now have an API, an application interface, which allows software products to talk to each other. In this case, TransForm could talk to things like Salesforce or SAP, or they could talk to other low-code systems like Alpha Anywhere or OutSystems. Tableau is another example. The business intelligence software could talk to as well. And you can also, like I mentioned a second ago, use Alpha Anywhere to create a more integrated platform. So if you don't like what you get with TransForm when it comes to the back end, if you would like things that are more of a dashboard, more suited to your needs, we always have the ability of building those out using our low-code Alpha Anywhere service. I think I just have a couple more to go, and then I'm here for your questions. By the way, if you do have questions, you can always type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel, and it looks like there is one here, so I will get to that in a moment. So let's take a look at we call it a field initiated data capture. So this is where someone is out in the field and they have filled out a form and they've submitted it. Okay, so this is sort of the typical one right here, but you can also have a form, and I think I pointed this out before, that initiates a blank copy of another instance of a form that goes off to another worker. For example, one example that I used the other day was when you have finished on a construction site, when you have finished doing the electrical work, or at least the rough electrical work, depending on how your house is built, but typically that's the time in which you install the insulation next. And then after the installation, they might put up wallboard, and after they put up wallboard, they might put up plaster. So it's one step after another step after another step. So you could have it set up so that when an electrician or a worker, on your site completes something, it can then trigger an action for another type of worker to perform another type of action. And that's built into the system. And then, so that's a worker out in the field initiating or creating a form by themselves, but you can actually have people pre-fill these forms and dispatch them out to people in the field. That's a very common scenario. Imagine an appliance repair person opens up their phone and sees, oh, here are the 3 places that I need to go today. So they have pre-filled in forms that have been sent by some administrator, typically in a back office, and those can get routed to the different people on the field. Now, in this case, we have a dispatcher sending each form individually to each worker. So we'll call this like Amy, Fred, and Jennifer, for example. And you've sent one to each one of these workers here, and they fill it out and they get the data back in. So that's one way of doing dispatch. But another way of doing dispatch is to use a queuing system. So they fill in the queue, the administrator fills in all the things that need to be done, but then it's up to the user in the field to say, aha, I've got free time. I'm going to go ahead and claim one of these and go and perform that action. And this data does not need to just be filled out by a person sitting in a back office. This can be filled out automatically because we have an API and other types of tools built into TransForm. For example, you could upload an Excel file which has these pre-filled forms, and they could automatically either go into a queuing system or be assigned directly to your workers in the field. So this is the giant mind map of how everything here works at the end, and that is our beginner's presentation. I think you guys, I know a lot of you are actually experts and you stuck around for all of this. I really appreciate it. So someone asked here, the only question I have right now is the database connection like that used in Alpha Cloud? So the database connection that we use is not quite like the cloud database, but you could Alpha because you can get a connection string to an Alpha Cloud database and have TransForm plugged directly into it. But TransForm, unlike the Alpha Cloud database, which at the moment we recommend just for development work, the one for TransForm is for production work as well. It's a properly backed up, maintained database and all that you don't really have to worry very much about. The only thing about the TransForm database is that it is not directly accessible using SQL commands like you can in Alpha Cloud. Instead, you use the API to pull the data in and out. Are there any other questions? It doesn't look like it. Hey, thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. We're going to do something a little bit more advanced next week, probably some stuff on routing. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more on building APIs that work with TransForm, and there are a few other advanced topics that we're going to get into over the next couple of sessions. If you do have any recommendations, or if you have any questions at all, please send them to TFService, as in TransForm Service, at alphasoftware.com. Thank you very much for attending. I'll see you next Tuesday. Take care and stay safe. Bye-bye.